Good morning. Welcome to the very first meeting of the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee. Can I just first of all introduce the top table? We have Vice Convener Liz Barrett at the end. We have Barbara Renton, Executive Director, and we have Adam Taylor from Committee Services. I'm also exceptionally delighted to welcome 4 members from the Climate Change Commission with us. We have sitting Jess Pepper. We have Emily McGregor, who's currently, I believe, missing a double period of physics. So we have Martin Mather and we have Nathan Jameson. And thank you very much for attending this meeting and helping to contribute. I will now ask Adam to confirm apologies received and take a roll call of members. Thank you.
Adam. Thanks, Convener. We've received no apologies for the meeting this morning. So joining us in the chamber this morning, we've got Councillor Anderson, Councillor Liz Barrett, Councillor Dave Cuthbert, Councillor David Illingworth, Councillor Noah Kogali, Councillor Grant Lang, Councillor Tom McEwen, Councillor Grant Stewart, and yourself. We've got 2 members joining us online. If I can just ask them to confirm that they're actually with us. Councillor Reid.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Welsh.
Present.
Thank you. That's everybody in attendance.
Thank you, Adam. Can I just can I just remind councillors to use the chat function, i.e. if they're online, to use a Q for question, C for comments, etc. For the members from the Climate Change Commission, if you can just raise your hand, or members in the room can just raise your hands if you would like to ask questions or comments or any amendments or anything that are coming forward. Thank you. Is there any declaration of interest for any of the papers before us today? Nathan?
Not sure if I meant to do this or not, but with the Nature Restoration Fund, I'm part of a community group in Blairgowrie that may or may not apply for funding this year. Yeah. You're non-voting members, so I don't think there's any issue with you contributing to the debate side of it. Martin.
Thanks for that clarification, but for full disclosure, to the declaration of interest, I am an owner of an EV, and secondly, I'm on the board of Tayside Woodland Partnerships, which likewise with Nathan might apply for funds.
Thank you. As an introduction, Davindy is going to give a presentation on the Strategy and Climate Action Plan, I believe.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, members. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Davindy Grant, and I'm the team leader for climate change and sustainable development at the council. And I've been invited here today to give a bit of an update where we are in the action plan, and then also, as this is a new committee, just provide a bit of an introduction to what the plan is and how it's structured. Next slide. So to the council's climate change and action plan was approved last December. It's structured into sort of 3 levels. So the highest level is 6 long-term outcomes, which I'll sort of go through in more detail later. But these are sort of around how you would build net zero, or a commitment to reach net zero by 2045, or having a resilient economy. Below that are 36 council commitments which is sort of things that we'll do about how we'll embed climate change into our governance or actions we'll take. And then below that is 8 thematic action plans. So these cover sort of 6 topical areas. So transport, buildings and energy, business and industry, land use, waste, resilience, governance, and education and engagement. And it's the sort of the action plans associated with that we update every year. Next slide, please. I don't suppose there's any way I can move because I can't actually see the slides from where I'm standing. Great. That's better. So just to provide an overview to the governance and delivery structure. So at the sort of the highest level, the Perth and Kinross Council maintains sort of overall responsibility for ensuring the council meets its climate change sort of targets and statutory requirements. But within that, this committee will play a key role in sort of monitoring, ensuring, providing guidance, making decisions associated with that. And then below that, on the officer side, we have the Climate Change Board, which is chaired by Scott Nicol and is comprised of a number of sort of senior officers that make sort of delegated decisions with respect to climate change. And then below that, we have 8 working groups, one focused on each thematic area, the colleagues of which provide a huge amount of expertise. So with that, we have sort of on the transport side, Alexander Deans, on the buildings and energy, Grant Key and Nicola Lennon, on the waste side, Sheila Best, for land use, Ben Wilson and Brenda Murray, business and industry is led by Serge Marone, I lead the resilience group, education and engagement is Scott Nicol, and governance is Lisa Simpson. Sort of in parallel to the council's governance structure, we have the Perth and Kinross Climate Change Commission, which has representatives on this committee, and also the convener and vice convener from this committee sit on the commission. And that's tasked with both providing sort of oversight and helping to provide sort of guidance to the council, and then also recognizing that climate change requires actions out with the council control, and helping to sort of mobilize those groups of actors. Next slide, please. So just in terms of working with the commission, some of the key sort of remits you can see there include scrutinizing the initial council roadmap and helping to shape the expansion of further development of roadmaps, helping us to identify good practice in areas that should be promoted, helping us develop a means to engage children and young people effectively. So on the commission, we have a quarter of the members are sort of under 25, but within that, there's even how do we engage the sort of the younger spectrum of the sort of the younger children, because climate change will sort of disproportionately affect them the most. And then also how they can help us champion climate change, promote action, use their influence. And I think very topically at the moment, help us to consider the interconnections with other ongoing pressures, such as sort of biodiversity and the cost of living crisis. Next slide, please. And so now I'm just going to quickly go through the 6 outcomes from the plan and sort of what we're doing with respect to them. So the first outcome is achieving net zero aligned with the Paris Agreement and Scottish Government targets with the ambition of achieving them sooner. Next slide, please. So just to give you a brief overview of where our emissions come from. Transport remains our sort of largest sector, currently just over sort of a quarter of our overall emissions. For the eagle-eyed amongst you, you may sort of notice that this looks quite different from last year. And the reason for that is the data that we get from the UK government around our sort of overall emissions composition in previous years has always only included carbon dioxide. And this year, in the data for the first time, they've given us data on sort of methane and nitrous oxide and other greenhouse gases, which as a result of that, the emissions associated with agriculture and land use have shot up considerably, which has sort of changed the balance. Next slide, please. So from that graph, just to sort of summarize what it showed was that we sort of have what's probably the big five, or actually the big four. So between transport, agriculture, land use emissions, and domestic energy, those are responsible for 88% of the council's emissions. One thing which you can't show on a pie chart, but is quite important to emphasize, is also the emissions that we're taking out. And the sequestration from our forests and grassland is equivalent to 27%, so just more than all of our sort of transport emissions. So it's an area that, in addition to cutting, we can potentially be looking at how we can be increasing our sequestration. Next slide, please. In addition to the sort of the big five, we have what I like to call the influencers. So business and industry. So the energy associated with these is only 6%, but the impact of working with business can be quite a bit higher. So it's about how we can be working with our supply chains. Yesterday, we had a meeting with the National Farmers Union, and they were talking about how there's been a big push on sort of agriculture to decrease emission because of business. Then there's also things around employee and business travel, and also very much about having the green skills. Do we have the jobs within Perth and Kinross or within the sort of the wider region actually needed to make this transformation? And so business will play an important role. Waste, similarly, is only 4%, but it has a much bigger impact. So when you think about, okay, how much energy does it take to recycle aluminum tin? That's relatively small. But when you think about, because you've recycled that aluminum tin rather than put it in the bin, you avoided all of that sort of upstream mining and the transport associated with getting the aluminum to the UK and doing all of that. It has a much bigger footprint, or the same thing with sort of textiles or food waste or things like that. So it's an important sector, even though sort of on this sort of on the overall emissions is a small picture. And then finally, sort of public sector energy. So combined with the NHS, police and other public sector partners, we only are responsible for sort of 2% of the direct emissions. However, BEIS has calculated that 65% of overall emissions are within the PKC scope of influence. So we can have potentially quite a big impact, even though we're a relatively small sort of direct player. Next slide, please. So how much change have we made? There's a lag in the data that we get. So last month, we just received the 2020 data, which is sort of reflecting the emissions during sort of the heart of COVID-19, which is it. But as a result of that, we had a sort of 16% drop. And between 2005 to 2020, we had a 46% drop. Next slide, please. And so just to give you an idea of where we need to be, by 2030, we need to have a 75% reduction on 1990 levels, which is approximately a 42% cut from 2020 levels. And similarly, by 2040, the Scottish Government has committed us to a 90% cut, and by 2045, at the latest, sort of net zero. Next slide, please. And they've also given us a sort of range of interim targets. So around decarbonizing our light fleet by 2025, by 2030, having a 20% reduction in vehicle kilometers, by 2032, having all social housing a minimum of EPCB, and by 2038, all public sector buildings to be zero emission. Next slide, please. So the rest of the outcomes are a bit shorter, but outcome 2 is building a more resilient Perth and Kinross. Next slide. So within the Climate Action Plan, there's a whole strand focused on resilient, which is split down into sort of 5 priority actions. So it's around building resilient organizations, both the council and our businesses, developing resilient and empowered communities, ensuring we have resilient infrastructure, continued work on flood risk management, and developing resilient ecosystems. And some of the key actions that we're undertaking, we're out to tender for a strategic climate change risk and opportunity assessment. We're continuing to deliver flood management schemes. We're supporting community resilience forums. Last year, we launched a new program to implement a bridge scour sort of assessment and protection, and continued work with the Tayside Local Resilience Partnership. Next slide. So outcome 3, ensuring climate action is fair and benefits all, and we deliver a green recovery to COVID-19. So key actions associated with this are the strong linkages with the ongoing cost of living crisis. So last year, Council agreed to fund the expansion of home energy advice, which we're just in the process of finalising the service level agreements for. And there's quite a big overlap between actions that save you money and also cut your sort of carbon emissions. And so we're working with comms on sort of doing a big public awareness campaign this autumn. We've been working with our community plan partnerships about ensuring that the local outcome improvement plan, which focuses on sort of reducing inequality, recognizes the interlinkages with climate change. I think this is more of a sort of theme than a specific action, but it's about how we ensure that rural considerations are sort of addressed as well as urban. We're working on improving the energy efficiency of our social housing estate. We're working with businesses on the supply chains and sort of helping them develop sort of green economy transition plans. Next slide, please. Outcome 4, enhancing biodiversity to help avoid an ecological emergency. Next slide. So actions for this are sort of spread between the land use and climate resilience themes in the action plan. So these include sort of levers that the council has around sort of strengthening planning, how we can look at sort of rural land use and increase carbon sequestration, biodiversity, what we can do within our council green spaces, and how we sort of build these resilient ecosystems. So some key projects to flag are the work we've been doing with the Perth Shore Nature Connections partnership about how we can develop a landscape scale sort of biodiversity enhancement project, working to help identify afforestation and peatland restorations across Perth and Kinross, working to accelerate the delivery of the Tayside Local Biodiversity Action Plan, and leading the innovative project to develop Scotland's first sort of biodiversity towns and villages. Next slide, please. Outcome 5 is around engaging and empowering young people to take climate action. So, I mean, I've mentioned the sort of the Climate Commission already. In November this year, we're planning Perth and Kinross' first Youth Climate Conference. We're just starting rolling out Energy Sparks in Schools, which is a program engaging with sort of children and young people on how they can cut emissions in their classrooms and get a better understanding of how their school actually uses energy and what it's costing the school, which has had effect in other local authority areas, so we're hopeful. And then it's more widely about ensuring the curriculum supports learning about climate change and its causes, so our students sort of come out sort of educated and empowered, and also as a council that we set a good example by minimizing the greenhouse gas emissions on our estate and also sort of demonstrating other areas of best practice. Next slide, please. So the final commitment is around empowering our communities and businesses to take action in line with the Perth and Kinross offer. Next, please. So this slide just gives a bit of an example of how much good work is already going on in our communities. At latest count, on our sort of community climate action map, we have 139 community groups involved in sort of climate change or environmental projects and 125 sort of individual projects mapped. And through public engagement, we did, especially sort of last year, but we're sort of getting sort of similar feedback this year. There's a lot of people in the community who want to take part and want to do something, but they're not quite sure, you know, who to contact or how to get involved. So that's one of the things we're trying to do, is sort of help raise the profile of community groups and help people find sort of appropriate opportunities, as well as sort of working with community groups and trying to work and partner with them to help them deliver on their ideas. Next slide, please. So looking forward, over the next few months, we're in the process of developing our annual review and update of the action plan, which we'll be taking to full council hopefully on the 9th of November. We are also developing our annual public sector reporting duty, which we'll be taking to this committee, I think it's the 16th of November. And then we're progressing key strategies. So the mobility strategy, our new statutory local heat and energy efficiency strategy that we have to develop by December next year, as well as a sort of estate decarbonization strategies, which are focused on both our domestic and non-domestic estate. And then also supporting our communities through the Nature Restoration Fund, which will be discussed later this meeting, with the cost of living crisis, and also more widely community groups. Next slide, please. Just to highlight, there will be member training opportunities. So we've arranged for there to be a full day of climate literacy training for all the members of this committee if interested. Both Councillor Waters and Councillor Barrett have undertaken it and are sort of speak highly of it. We're still trying to finalize a date, but if you're available, it's a very good opportunity. And so members of this committee will be prioritized for that, but then it will be opened up to sort of other interested members. In addition to that, we're providing a sort of condensed short course, so a sort of 2.5-hour climate emergency training, which will be sort of open to all members and also to sort of senior officers at the council. Next slide, please. And then finally, just to flag, if you're interested in sort of more details about the climate action plan, we've made a sort of interactive website, which PK Climate Action, which includes sort of all the details of the plan, how you can take action, what information on community groups and case studies, and it would be great if you could promote that to your communities. As well, we've recently launched social media, sort of Facebook, Twitter, and then in a sort of attempt to sort of engage more with sort of children and young people, sort of Instagram and TikTok. And similarly, if you're able to, if you're on social media, to follow and promote relevant posts to your communities, that would be very much appreciated. Next slide. I think that's the end. Are there any questions?
Thank you. First question, Councillor Dave Cuthbert, if anyone in the room has any questions, please just let us know and we will ask them in due course.
Thank you, Convener. Morning, Davindi. Thank you for that presentation. It's very good. You had a slide which was entitled, "Where do we need to be going forward?" And it took the base year as 2020. I was a bit confused by that because 2020 was during COVID, so obviously it's going to be lower than it might be. So I wondered why it wasn't 2019 as the base year, given that that was a normal year.
Thank you for the reminder. So we have the figures as well for 2019 as the base year. The base year we're actually working to is 1990. I just put 42% on 2020 levels just to give you an indication of where we needed to go. But our sort of statutory requirement is 1990.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Kugali.
Thank you very much for that. It was a really good presentation. This question's probably better directed at the convener. If we could have a brief verbal outline of the green transport strategy that Councillor Lang said you had in June, that would be quite helpful, I think, given how high it was on the list of pollutants.
Thank you, Councillor Kugali. If I'm going to just pass that on to, green transport strategy is very, very important to us as a council. I do not have a briefing in front of me with it all, but thank you for your question. David Littlejohn is here and he will be able to update you on that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, convener, and I'm going to pass it actually on to Alex Dean, who's also here, who can give you much more of the specific timescale for the mobility strategy, if that's okay. Maybe Alex isn't in the call at the moment.
Yes, I am, David. Thanks. As members will be aware, that there's been significant changes over the last, well, basically through the COVID experience. We have been noting that our transport patterns have changed fairly drastically. So in order to try and get a steer on where we want to go, and certainly in relation to some of the climate work we're doing, we're actually going to be undertaking a across the board mobility strategy for the whole of the area. That will include obviously traffic patterns in the main, but rail, bus, and very much focused on sustainable travel. And to a large degree, actually, a lot of the issues we have are to do with hearts and minds. So there's a fairly major exercise coming up soon. We will be doing that over probably the next year and a half, but hopefully that will set the sort of plan and the strategy for basically reaching our sort of, as you can see from Davindi's graphs, our emission targets are fairly onerous, but that's the intention at the moment.
Do we have any more questions? Jess Pepper.
Thank you for the presentation. That's really helpful to understand about the mobility plans as well. Just wondering what the timing of that is, so that we can relate to that, the Commission work.
Davindi.
Was your question about the mobility strategy or the wider?
The mobility strategy.
Alexander.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, I can answer that. Actually, we've actually sort of commenced some of that work early doors at the moment. We are actually appointing a new post quite shortly to take that specific role on. But in essence, it's actually started at the moment. But it will, as you can imagine, it's a fairly significant piece of work, and it will probably take an estimate at the moment, probably about 18 months to complete, but it will very much set the future patterns for the next 20 years or so. So it's actually a significant piece of work.
Thank you. Councillor Kugali.
Yeah, it's a bit more of a broad one. It'd be quite helpful, I think, to know how the remit of this committee was specifically decided, given that pie chart did show the breadth of the challenge. It'd be quite helpful to know why the specific things were included.
The remit of this committee is very much based on, we feel one of the biggest challenges facing us going forward is the climate emergency, and as a political decision, and in addressing that, we felt it was important to have a committee that represented that challenge facing us. So as a political decision, we decided to set up this committee, which highlights our priorities as a council administration, and I think most people on the council support that. Given the remit of the committee, we've been in discussion and are continuing to be in discussions with officers over that remit, and are happy for people to feed into their views and take them on view
and just take note of them in our decision making, and these discussions are still ongoing. I'm sure you're more than aware that at full council we put covered the legality of setting this committee up, but it's still a work in progress. So if you want to feed into it, Noah, please do. It would be welcome. Thank you. Councillor McEwen.
Thank you, Convener. Davinda, you mentioned sequestration of greenhouse gases quite near the beginning of your presentation. And how big a problem going forward is it going to be to try and prevent double counting of sort of areas of land set aside green for houses where both businesses, private landowners and things like the council try and claim different assets as sequestrating their carbon footprint?
The short answer is it's not a big issue, because how the emissions are calculated when it looks at sort of business and industry, if they had bought some emissions from or some sequestration credit from Perthink and Kinross, that's not included in their figure. It's actually just looking at how much energy they've actually consumed in the wider base calculation. So it's not looking at actually where have the emissions been moved around. At some point in the future, if they do change the system, there is a risk, but as the system currently stands at the high level local authority reporting, there's no risk of double counting.
So things are taken as a wider whole for the whole region, incorporating everything that's contained within that, say, bubble, to count it all. At the moment, it's not, because obviously you get businesses who have a high carbon footprint coming forward saying, "Oh, we've got this area of land here where we're balancing our carbon emissions," and they do that more like PR rather than whether it's into something that's real.
I suppose it's quite a complex system. I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. If I could get back to you offline, I think it's probably easier if I can show you a diagram.
Yeah, obviously I'm asking the question because I do think it is something that gets muddled and mixed up, and there's the reality of it sometimes get muddled. So yeah, I'd be grateful for off the record feedback.
I'll get something to you soon.
Thank you. Councillor Jack Welch, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks very much for that presentation, Davinda. That was really insightful. My question is, where do you see and how do you think we can influence the planning process for new developments, really to ensure that best practice innovation and the correct direction of travel is part of that planning process to ensure we're effectively going in a positive direction with new developments around carbon emissions and not compounding the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. David, would you like to answer this question, please?
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's an interesting question, and I think it is a journey that we're on. So there are existing local development plan policies that do require new developments to have a much greater kind of direction of travel towards net zero. So, for example, for new developments, we require developers to look at, for example, district heating to see if that would be viable in a particular scheme. So the planning policies will evolve, and I think LDP3, which we're starting to work on now, will take that much further and have much more specific policies on that just transition to net zero carbon. The other side of the coin is, of course, building regulations. The planning is principally about land use and making sure that infrastructure is in place up front, but the building regulations themselves are continually being updated, and the market itself has a view. So speaking to some house builders recently, there are comparatively new developments now that wouldn't be considering a combination of air source heat pumps and solar. The building regulations are rapidly changing to not allow, for example, new gas appliances in homes. So we're moving constantly, and our policies need to keep up with that. But we have some robust sustainability policies in place at present. So I feel we're in a good position, and we'll only get better in that.
Thank you. I guess it's, for the purposes of actually understanding effectively the overall impact of a new development, and some sort of carbon audit as part of an application process. But that's obviously something for subsequent discussion. It may be something that Perth and Kinross can implement in advance of building standards changes, for example, just to inform the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lane, you have a comment?
Thanks, convener, and thanks to Vindy for the presentation. And first of all, delighted to be here at the first Climate Change and Sustainability Committee meeting ever at Perth and Kinross, and I welcome the 4 members of the public are part of the Commission here, and I'm sure that the benefit of having them there as we get used to this format, a lot of the more informed questions will come from them rather than from elected members. And so I'd like to welcome them here as well. And I'd like to say to Noah that the idea of having this committee, Noah, is that you can hold to account, questions that you did have about the green route and everything like that. It's putting a focus on this thing, and it gives you a chance to focus on areas about the climate change and sustainability. And if you have anything that you want in the remit or anything you want brought to the committee, go to the convener, go to the officers and ask, look, can we have a look at this? That's the idea of the committee. It's all of us working together with the members of the Commission to try and focus on this. Within the council, not blaming MD, I don't think there was enough focus on this. And that was the idea bringing forward the committee. And I think we can all get behind that and put it to the forefront of what we're doing across all remits. So that's what I feel, and it's useful to have people, from all over Perth and Kinross, because there'll be different issues in different areas. And so I'm looking forward to this committee developing. This is the first meeting. The remits and everything, everything's fluid, and that's the way it should be. We shouldn't be sitting in our silos. This belongs to this committee, this belongs to that. There's so much that climate change and sustainability is affected by and can be improved on. So I'm looking forward to watch how the committee develops in the hands of the convener and the vice convener and us as elected members and members of the Climate Commission. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions? Jess Pepper.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation and showing how everything fits together as well, Davindy. That's really helpful to understand and to share. Convener, I wondered if you may be able to share more thoughts about how this committee will relate to other committees as well, and just reflecting again the breadth of the challenge that we have here, how it expects to all connect up at that level.
Thank you for the question. The discussions that are ongoing, and these are ongoing, the full decision on the remit of this council, this committee will be made at full council within the scheme of administration. So that will be coming before councillors again whenever the next full council meeting is. The ability of this committee is intended that it will have the ability to look at any issues within the councils, any papers within the councils, whether that's in procurement or anything else, and how that relates to the challenges we face through mitigating the climate emergency or adapting to the climate emergency as well. So that's an important function of this council, is to be able to, I realise I'm getting a lot of crackling with this. Am I too close? So that's a key aspect of the committee, is the ability to do that. It will have direct responsibility over a lot of the green space, the biodiversity. You know, one of the key challenges we face is reversing this decline in biodiversity we've had through throughout the whole area. So hence the restoration of that, as we'll see in a paper later on, is an important part, and that will be a direct responsibility of this committee under the scheme of administration. But again, that's still to go forward again to full council for. That will help. Thank you. Technical things. Did it? All right. Hopefully that definitely helps. Thank you. Does that answer enough of your question?
To some extent, but I think there's maybe a wider conversation about that, and just to acknowledge there's an awful lot of really good learning has been done in the last couple of decades, nationally but also internationally, about how to do that well, so that climate doesn't become just the sustainability, ecological and climate crisis doesn't become sort of sidelined in just one area. So if there's support needed to make those connections, I'm sure that we can share those resources.
It's agreed fully. It's this is not the only committee that should be considering climate change or climate emergency issues. Every committee has a responsibility with any paper that comes forward to address these issues in the same way that we address financial issues or any other issues. So I agree absolutely fully with that, and certainly in as administration, I think we do take that very, very seriously, and are having constant conversations with how we can improve on that. Thank you for your comment. Councillor Anderson. Sorry. All right.
Just a quick one. Just wondered, it's a new committee. Looking forward to immediate concerns with working from home and changes in the council policy on that and the buildings that we have, the staff that we have. Will we have an input as a committee on the possible changes on that, on sustainability? While the other end, we've got Perth, it's down on its feet, and footfall is very, very important in Perth, and the council workers and employees in Perth are a valuable resource to the businesses within the town. I just wondered what input we will have on these changes to come.
Thank you for your question. Barbara's going to answer that.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Anderson, I think that, sort of that question does highlight, sort of the range of issues that, sort of would necessarily, sort of be of interest to the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee, but might not fall directly within, sort of the remit currently of this committee. So in relation to what buildings we have, that wouldn't necessarily be a decision for this committee, but we'd certainly be asking this committee their views on some of that. And I think that as the committee evolves, as we work, sort of to reduce our emissions, to reduce our footprint, then, sort of we would be speaking to this committee, but it might not be this committee that would be making those decisions.
Councillor McEwen first.
Thank you, Convener. As the Convener of Housing and Social Wellbeing, there's obviously a huge part of the role of our committee with the Housing Revenue Account to meet the new targets for our social housing. And I believe that plays a huge role in our climate footprint as a council. Obviously the decisions around that are made rightfully at my committee, but I do feel that this committee will have an oversight of how that plays into the whole Perth and Kinross jigsaw. And our committee will always take cognizance of the input and advice that comes from here about how we take that forward, or whether we do it quicker, whether we do it in a slightly different way than we're planned. So I think that's how I can see in the future how the different committees of the council will work together with this committee's support and advice to take forward the climate initiatives within our own briefs.
Thank you. Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Convener. It's just I really like to take issue with Councillor Anderson's comments about Perth dying on its feet. That's totally unhelpful. It's not factually correct. Retail is undergoing a difficult time, but to call out the city of Perth as dying on its feet, I think you should maybe rephrase that and think again about what you said, because there's a lot of good stuff going on in Perth. The council's got to keep driving things forward. There's a lot of businesses starting up, and Perth could be a vibrant place. It's unhelpful when we have elected members commenting such, talking our city down, and I think you should retract that comment. Or rephrase it.
Not rephrasing, just some memories of Perth being a vibrant city in the past, and it's gone. Look at it now compared to what it used to be. The high street is so many empty shops, which used to be vibrant, opening, dealing, people coming into town. Perth there's not the footfall at all in Perth now that we used to have, and the business people themselves are not inspired by things as they are just now. But as you say, it's possibly recovering from COVID, and some take a wee while to recover from that. But there's a major change in Perth from, as I remember it, in the good days when I had businesses operating in Perth.
Sorry, this isn't really the committee to discuss this, but quite happy to bring David Littlejohn in.
Thanks very much. I'm conscious we don't want to perhaps take up too much time diverting into a discussion about retail in Perth High Street, but I think it's fair to say that we have seen an increase in the number of vacant shops. However, that vacancy rate in Perth is still significantly better than many other comparable settlements across the country. So I think we need to kind of put it into that wider context as well. But clearly retail is changing, and city centres, and Perth is no different. High streets are becoming a place where retail will increasingly just become one of the things that people do when they're in the city centre. But it might be more around culture, leisure, eating, drinking, meeting friends, rather than principally shopping. And that's a change that we're well placed to take advantage of with investment in cultural facilities and significant funding through the council to look at adaptation of properties, particularly retail, into other uses. So I think we do have a plan in place for a sustainable transformation of Perth city centre, but we're doing it in the context of issues like this across the country. But we're certainly aware of it, alive to it, and responding to it.
Thank you. I think this is the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee. I think we've been a bit lenient with the questions for given the presentation that was given forward, but I think we would like to move on. Can I have Councillor Grant Stewart first, and then on to Martin after that? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Davindy, for your presentation. I thought it was an interesting point you made about the upstream with mining, quarrying, and I'm wondering, in your figures that you were presenting, is that upstreaming part of our carbon reductions, or is that something we could look at because we are in charge of recycling collections and recycling centres?
I'm happy to sort of make a start of this, and then I see Sheila Best is also on the call, who leads the waste team. With the sort of looking at the upstream element, one of the new requirements that came in under the Scottish Government's reporting regulations is, as a council, we're going to have to set a target not for Perth and Kinross's sort of wider sort of emissions of influence, but for the council's emissions of influence. So that would potentially sort of include those. But Sheila can probably advise more specifics on the waste aspects.
Apologies, can you just repeat the part you want me to comment on, Councillor?
Thank you. I was just wondering, with the upstream and quarrying and mining and transportation of goods around the world and the carbon that produces at the coalface, so to speak, and the transportation, I was wondering, with the council collecting recyclable goods and recycle centres, about the facts and figures around what we are collecting that reduces the carbon footprint of the upstream mining and quarrying.
I don't know if we've got specific information around that. We need to kind of look at that maybe offline for you. But obviously, when we're looking at kind of current contracts and kind of where those are going, at the moment there's a lot of processing that happens within England, so there is materials that will be processed further south. However, we do look within our contracts now about how we can embed an environmental cost against any kind of haulage of material, which then obviously then kind of supports then more localised processing. However, have to caveat that there is a lack of processing sort of within Scotland at the moment, and obviously that we would be keen to see more opportunities for infrastructure and processing within Scotland, and indeed within Perth and Kinross. So if we can attract investment and attract companies to come here and do that, that is obviously beneficial. So the closer we can process material, the better. However, depending on the commodity, it does depend then on whether it's feasible to have a kind of scaled plant within your own locality or region. So I'm not sure if that quite answers the question you're looking for there.
No, I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin?
Thank you. I just wanted to sort of, we talked a bit about governance. I wanted to sort of close that discussion off. First of all, very much the feeling within the Commission, we've had 2 meetings so far, is that we really congratulate Perth and Kinross Council on having started to tackle the climate emergency and creating the Commission. I think that's potentially a very brave move by the Council. We are independent. We want to be helpful and we want to be supportive, but remember that we can also be a critical friend. So we will try to avoid that in public as much as possible, but we will be part of our job scrutinising what the Council is doing, what the Council is not doing, what it could do better, what it could do instead, what it could stop doing, which might save money. So it's just a reminder to everybody that, we will be critical friends, which are the best friends to have.
Appreciated, Martin. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Illingworth, do you have a question or a comment? No, sorry. If that's all the questions, we can now thank Davindi for that presentation. I think it was excellent. I think the team within the council that Davindi is the team leader for is growing considerably over the last few years, and I think the work they've done in creating this climate change action plan is exceptionally good, and has got to be commended for the amount of effort that's gone into it and the vision about where we're heading as a council in an area. So thank you, Davindi, for that, and your team, Davindi. Can we move on to the next paper, please? Which is item 4 in the paper, and that's the introduction of charging for electric vehicles. And can I ask Alex Deans to present this paper, please? Thank you.
Thank you, convener, and good morning to members of the committee. I'll be brief. Members will be aware we have played the council has played a key facilitating role over the past few years in providing free energy to encourage the growth in electric vehicles. As you can see from the paper, growth has been actually fairly significant over the last few years, and certainly it was an interesting statistic on the TV last night where 1 in 5 new vehicles is an electric vehicle. I think it's only going to go up. We are, and the essence of this paper is about charging for electric vehicles. We have been free charging over the last few years, as you know, but we're now at a position, given the number of vehicles on the market, that we are subsidising almost to the tune of just under $250,000 per year. I think members will understand, given the current financial climate now, that is probably totally unsustainable. I think the key thing as well is, should we not charge, that figure will only ever increase. And given members will be aware of the issues with the energy market at the moment, so it's likely to potentially increase quite significantly. I'd also ask members to note that it's not something we're doing in isolation. There's roughly half of Scotland's local authorities are doing the same thing, and it's probably fairly safe to say that the other half will probably follow suit. In simplest terms, what we're doing at the moment is actually providing effectively free fuel or free energy for EV users. Again, I would suggest that where electric vehicles were very much seen as a niche part of the market not so long ago, it's now much more mainstream, and I think it's only fair and reasonable that people actually pay for the actual fuel or the energy they actually use. Although the paper alludes to the involvement with the private sector, I think it is probably fair to say that we see the future as very much more involved with the private sector. I'm not sure if anybody's seen the recent BP or Shell adverts on the TV, but I think that is the way it's going. We're probably not there yet. It's probably 5-10 years away, but the private sector will have a fairly significant role for EV in the future, and that's work we're actually going to be taking forward in the near future. I think it's also fair to say that the private sector, I mean, at the end of the day, they will be there to make money. They will not invest in infrastructure in Perth and Kinross should the council be providing free charging. So hopefully that's an introduction to the paper, but the paper is effectively recovering some of our costs at the moment, which are fairly significant. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Alex, for that. Any questions now? If you can just let me know, I will give them in turn. Councillor Kaguli, can I just give you one at a time to give everybody else a fair chance at answering questions? Your first question, please.
I'm aware that I did ask Barbara this a couple of days ago, but if there is any data that you've got on the number of actual EVs themselves, the growth in Perth and Kinross, that'd be quite helpful, rather than just how many times they've charged, because obviously those two numbers don't necessarily have to be exactly correlated, given that over time they'll probably have to charge less, and it may just be people passing through. But if you've not got data on that, I do understand.
No, it's a good question. We don't have, well, I've not got the data at the moment, but it's something we can, through our back office systems, we can try and interrogate. I'll get back to you.
I did think there was an app out there that gave you, it was quite robust or quite inclusive, and it gave you most of the charge points within the area. Maybe one of our electric car owners may give a bit more information. I can let you comment on that quickly, Martin, and then you can ask your question after.
Map. As an EV owner, I support charging. And I think that the rates being proposed are modest, to say the least. The issue for most EV owners is not paying, it's availability and reliability. And Scotland as a whole is woeful in this compared with England. That might be because of the greater involvement of the private sector in England, I don't know. I'm not generally a supporter of great involvement in public infrastructure by the private sector, but there you go. My main comment on this, especially considering
Martin, can I just ask if there's comments, can we leave them?
Well, it's a question.
If it's leading to a question, that's acceptable.
Because of the increasing number of tourists using EVs, especially, I'm thinking about this, where the 3-hour limit time came from. I often see tourists in Pitlochry who are trying to get into Inverness. The reliability along the A9 is poor. 3 hours on a 7 kilowatt charge will not get you from Pitlochry to Inverness. So I'm just wondering where that 3 hours figure comes from.
Alex Deans.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, it was, I'm not to say it was an arbitrary figure, but I think one of the things we were trying to avoid was actually people actually, staying on the charge facility for most of the day. We have had instances where people have said they can't get on the charger because somebody's parked there all day. So it was a figure. I take your point that the 3 hours is not long enough. I think with battery technology and the charging facilities we have at the moment are time bound. They will need to be replaced at some point in time. I think the facilities will be more powerful, faster. I think that's the way it's going. I just think it's a particular place we are in the market at the moment, but I think these things will evolve. But I do take your point.
Subsequent, please carry on, Martin.
Yes, it's a point of information. 7 kilowatt is not a charger issue, it's a car issue. 80% of the EVs on the market, the maximum rate on an AC charger is 7 kilowatts, so it doesn't matter what charger infrastructure you have in place. They're limited to 7 kilowatt hours. 3 hours gives you 21 kilowatts. If you're getting 3 miles per kilowatt hour, that's 60 miles.
Thank you. Given with no more questions just now, Councillor Kaguli, your second question.
Thank you. Yeah, section 5.1 suggests that the Electronic Vehicle Association of Scotland report on tariffs had been taken into account. That report mainly seems to focus on the overstay charges, which don't actually translate to the overstay charges in this paper. So in the initial report, that they recommend a minimum of £10 and then £1 a minute beyond that. Whereas the suggestion in this paper, unless I'm misreading it, seems to be just £10, which is incredibly low. So I was wondering for a bit of clarification on that would be quite helpful.
Alex?
Yeah, could I bring in my colleague Neil, who's a bit more au fait with the charge rates at the moment?
Thanks, Alex. In terms of the overstay fees, at the moment there is a wide range of overstay fees charged across the country, ranging from about 5 up to I think a maximum of 30. I think is probably the highest charged by a local authority. The suggested rate of £10 does accord with what our neighbouring authorities like Dundee City Council are charging. So it was felt that was maybe an appropriate level at this point in time, but obviously we can review that going forward as the use is monitored.
Thank you. Councillor McEwen, you have a question?
My first question actually is quite an open one, and Martin may want to comment on it. We put in the paper 3 hours. Our officer suggested that we're doing that to stop people hogging chargers, but practically that might not be the right 3 hours might not be the right time to choose. I know that we're starting something off fresh here and it's going to be constantly reviewed and we can adapt it later. But should we in the first instance suggest that it be 4 hours so that somebody could charge at the 7 kilowatts and make that journey to Inverness? I don't know, I'm just suggesting that. I don't know if that's, I don't have an EV car, so I'm not sure of the, just to make it practical. There's no point us introducing a system that is not as practical as possible for the current infrastructure. Obviously, as the infrastructure changes and improves, we will constantly review it and change these things going forward. I don't know, just that's a question that came to mind from the comments from Martin.
If we stick to the questions just now, I think we can have a bit of a debate at the end of that and look at potential amendments or any feedback we want to give into officers on this paper at the appropriate time. But I take on view. I can
rephrase what I'm saying for it, because as a question, I'm asking: would 4 hours give somebody a charge time sitting in Pitlochry at 7 kilowatts to get to Pitlochry, to get to Inverness? That's really the question.
Neil, do you want to answer that one, or?
Yeah, I suppose it would give you more mileage, but I think realistically, if somebody is on a journey to Inverness, stopping in at Pitlochry, they probably aren't going to look to be using a 7 kilowatt charger. You know, the rapid charging facilities at Pitlochry would be what most people would consider a journey charger. You stop, charge up for half an hour, and continue on. But I suppose as Alex highlighted, you know, the appropriateness of the 3 hours is really just to make sure that chargers are available when people need to use them. 4 hours would not solve that issue, but it would limit the availability. And you know, we do have a relatively small number of chargers at the moment, so we've got to manage that demand.
Can I follow on just with a subsequent question in relation to this? In Appendix 1, we've got a list of all the chargers we have. Do we have any 7 kilowatt? Most of them seem to be the 7 kilowatt ones, all seem to be at Canal Street. And I don't see us with any in Pitlochry. Am I missing something, or is the potential of the 7 kilowatt charger in Pitlochry or more rural, are they private ones? Neil, I don't know if you know that.
Sorry, yeah, I think the issue that the member was making was that even though the AC charger at Pitlochry is a 22 kilowatt unit, a lot of vehicles can only take a maximum of 7 kilowatts from that charger. It's a vehicle limitation rather than a charging infrastructure limitation. That is changing, though, that there is now a significant number of vehicles that can charge faster from AC units, and obviously all vehicles can make use of rapid charging, which is obviously the sort of preferred charging for people that are making longer distance journeys.
Thank you. Questions? We have Councillor Grant Lane.
Thanks, convener. It was just a question about overnight parking and charging. You know, if it's a works vehicle or any other. Down the South Inch and at Mill Street, I see vehicles parked overnight. So somebody might take their car at 9-10 o'clock and put it on charge, so it's ready for going in the morning. And probably because it's free to park at these times as well, might have an incentive to take it at that time. Do we expect people who do this, because they are used quite often in the evening, to put their car on charge at 9 o'clock and then come back at midnight to take it away in case they get fined, or is there an armistice for parking overnight on the timing?
Is that Alex? Is that Neil? Is that you as well?
Yeah, I can feel that. That is something we are exploring with Charge Place Scotland. At the moment, they don't allow us to have differential overstay fees based on time of day, it is something they're looking to bring in, which would allow us to therefore allow folk to charge overnight or beyond the 4 hours during off-peak period. There is, though, again, sort of going back to earlier comments, there is a limited number of chargers that we've got. So if people were charging all night, then it obviously restricts access for other people. Perhaps in the future, when we've got significantly higher numbers of chargers, you know, the sort of hub model that is in place in other authorities, that would allow people to charge with the availability still being there for other people to use.
Thank you. Councillor Jack Welsh.
Thanks, convener. Two very quick pieces of information just to sort of guide the committee, and then a question. 1 kilowatt hour drives an electric vehicle approximately 4 miles. So a 7 kilowatt charger connected to a vehicle will give approximately 28 miles of range. Most commercial operators will not install a charger less than 50 kilowatts power, simply because the business case to do that does not stack up, i.e. a vehicle is hanging around too long without them generating money. So while lots of cars just now can only take charge at 7 kilowatts, the direction of travel is that all or most cars will have 50 kilowatt charge capability. My question is, there's quite a lot of risk associated with the council operating and maintaining charging points just associated with the nature of the way charging vehicles is changing to move to these faster charging units and potentially our infrastructure being, if you like, less used but still having a burden of maintenance. I would just ask, or my question is, how are we monitoring, if you like, how to minimise our risk while identifying, you know, the opportunities for the council to be engaged and still be engaged and support the EV charging opportunities for residents of Perth and Kinross?
Alexander,
yeah, thanks, convener. I think that's a really interesting question. We are fairly recently, we've actually begun to get a little more sort of requests, is probably the right word, from the private sector to get involved in discussions about how we take forward the whole EV issue. I think the issue we have, certainly from a service perspective, is the private sector, and I think it's fair to say, and most people will appreciate this, they're there to make money. I think any discussions that we do have, we'll need to make sure that, you know, all our residents are, you know, basically given the same amount of service. There's no reason that, you know, there's probably no point in, you know, a BP sort of charger, a new hub coming into Perth, and you know places like Blairgowrie, Auchterarder may never have. So I think we need to make sure that any discussions we do have with the private sector, there is some sort of cross-fertilisation where, you know, any profits that can be made from, say, a hub in Perth, you know, could actually still, you know, fund some improvements in some of the other places in Perth and Kinross. So I think we're looking for a consistency across the area, rather than, you know, hubs coming in and effectively taking the low-hanging fruit, if you like. There's a long way to go in this. I think there's a lot of discussions. It's only one part of, you know, where we need to look at. You know, there are other areas of concern in terms of how we look at new development, how we look at on-street charging. But it's a piece of work actually we'll be taking forward over the next few months. So we'll probably be coming back to this committee with these issues.
Thank you. Jess Pepper.
Thanks, convener. yeah, this good paper, and great to see that the sort of diversity of the community is being taken into account, and understand that this is an evolving piece of work. I'm just wondering, and perhaps this complicates things, but there's such, the diversity is so wide that is there scope for variation across some communities? So, for example, in Pitlochry or Broxden, where there's a number of chargers, extending to a longer period to allow folk to charge might be fine, whereas if you're in Aberfeldy or Rannoch, that might not be. If somebody's there for more than 3 hours and they're in that charging point, that might not be so great. And just also mindful of accessibility. There is a perception that EVs are owned by those who have more affluence, but actually since the grants have opened up, particularly since grants have opened up for second-hand cars as well, it means that people are actually investing in electric cars because they are cheaper to run as well, and we're facing obviously cost of living crisis. So just being mindful of that as well. Actually, families may be dependent on electric cars, and being mindful of that across communities as well, because obviously as part of the whole picture we want climate action everybody to be able to take action on climate, because if they care and they want to be acting too. So it's not to discriminate against anybody.
Absolutely, thank you. And if I get your question right, you're looking at is there potential within the system to differentiate based on your geographical location of the chargers? I think, does that come to you, Neil? Thank you.
Yeah, that would certainly be possible using the current back office system. The overstay charges are set per unit. So if we did identify particular charge points that we were comfortable that they could be used for longer periods without impacting on availability, then that's certainly something that we could do.
Barbara would like to come in as well with this question.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Jess. I think that the issue really is, sort of about, we absolutely understand that differentiated approach. I wonder whether, sort of what we could be asking, officers to do is introduce the charge at a flat rate and bring back at some point, once we know what the uptake is, once we know what sort of the need is and the growing need, to look at that differentiation. I'm conscious that one of the reasons why we're very keen, sort of to get the paper, and we've brought the paper just now to allow us then to introduce charges from January, is to be able to communicate that message clearly across, sort of not just Perth and Kinross, but beyond that. So trying to get that message and then saying there's differentiated charges is quite difficult, but sort of if committee are quite happy that we could, sort of once a decision is taken about whether to charge and the level of charging, then we could bring back something in due course about that differentiation.
Thank you. Martin, did you want to come in with another question?
Well, it is almost the same question, because at the other end of the scale, Broxden is a park and ride. 3 hours there, no electric vehicle is going to use that as a park and ride, because you then have to get the bus into town, do your shopping and come back out. Push to do that in 3 hours.
I'm not Neil, can you, is there a comment or that you can make on that, or?
I guess it would be, similar to previous comments, that the possibility is there to change the differential rate, but I'm mindful of Barbara's suggestion that it does become complex in terms of the messaging and the information that we need to get out to residents and visitors to the area.
Thank you. Councillor Dave Cuthbert, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, convener. My understanding of what these charges are about is basically about cost recovery. I'm wondering, in terms of cost recovery, whether it's just the cost of the electricity, or whether it includes things like depreciation. So as time goes on, they depreciate, you've got to recover that. Does it include capital investment so actually does it recover some of the costs of that capital investment? Maintenance, is that covered in it as well, or is it purely the energy price?
Alex, do you want to take this one or Neil?
Yeah, I can take it. Yeah, we've obviously you've seen from the paper there's a variety of different sort of charging sort of regimes across the local authorities. Well, what we've tried to do at this stage is just keep it fairly simple. We've went for a rate that's it's sort of, it's not one of the highest, it's not the lowest, it's probably in the middle somewhere. We've been engaging with our energy and property colleagues. It's quite a black box kind of area in terms of sort of determining exactly what the charge is for these EV units. We've come to a figure that certainly our property and energy people think will cover the energy costs. We think it maybe cover a bit of maintenance costs as well, and hopefully maybe a bit of additional funding that come out of that in terms of putting new infrastructure in. We just don't know at this stage. It's something we're going to have to look at and monitor it fairly closely. But I think where we are in terms of the way the energy markets and that are going, the tariffs will probably only go up at some point in time. I mean, the tariffs at the moment, the way we've actually set it in terms of comparing, EV costs, running costs to petrol costs, it's roughly a third. So it's actually a fairly a good deal for an EV user at the moment, but I think it will go up, and I think it's something we really need to sort of monitor closely. And again, it will come into discussions with the private sector in terms of how they see the world moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbert, you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, Convener. It just strikes me that if built into this charge is a fee, if you like, which goes towards capital, you could actually roll out a lot more of these units and use the funding from the charges to pay for that. So you're paying the interest on the loan, if you like, to put more units in. I just wondered whether that's something that we could consider at a future meeting.
Thank you, Convener. If I can come in, I think that, sort of very much so, sort of, and within, sort of the work that the team are doing, then it is about mapping about where further chargers should be going, and picking up, sort of some of the points that Martin's been making about how the distance is. Now, we're not responsible for all of that, sort of particularly out with Perth and Kinross, but there is a body of work that needs to be done, and this is a start.
Thank you. Councillor Kugali, your third question.
Thank you. Yeah, in 5.3, it rightly points out the challenges that are probably going to come down the track in the future, especially with people in flatter developments that may want charging at home. I wonder if any consideration has been given, and this is possibly one of the remit issues that I was worried about earlier, whether we might be able to make it easier for people in possibly listed buildings to have chargers at home, and whether that's a challenge that might be coming down the track. But again, that might lie more with planning. But I think it is an important point of question.
Alex or Neil, do you want to answer that?
It's probably, I get the point. We've been asked the question before on this. I'm not sure of the answer at this stage. It's probably more of a planning issue at this stage. I get the gist of it, but it would probably be more. David, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, sorry, I can do. I think again, this is not a simple answer, and it's absolutely the case that in larger settlements, like Edinburgh, where there are significant tenement properties, some of which will be listed, some of which are not, the solution actually is community hubs. It's on street community charging hubs. That's the solution that's being rolled out in larger cities. That's less appropriate in Perth because the number of tenemental properties that are occupied is significantly lower, but we do need to find a solution for it. So listed buildings per se can have individual charging hubs. There's EV charging points. There's nothing to prevent that. It just requires listed building consent. and we can't change the regulations in that regard. But there are countless properties across the country that are private homes, that are listed buildings, that will have their own individual charging hub. They just have to go through a process. The bigger issue, I think, is where you are on properties that don't have any kind of front private parking. That's the area that we need to kind of focus on, and that's where at the moment the technology solution is kind of community charging hubs in, you know, covering a variety of streets. But we need to be mindful that the technology is changing rapidly, and the solutions that we're proposing just now probably won't be the solutions that will be around in 5-6 years time. We're looking at road surfaces charging vehicles. We're looking at hydrogen fuel cells as being an alternative. So we just need to be mindful of that rapidly changing environment, which is probably, you know, explains some of the hesitancy in our answers. This is a fast-moving environment.
Thank you. Councillor McEwen, you have a second question?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. It's more around the practicalities of the overstay fine that we give people, because we do have people who use our parking facilities, who use different things, who receive fines and then just throw them in the bin. I'm assuming that when you use a charging point, that we know the car, that obviously I've never used one, so I don't know the practicalities of it. And should a vehicle rack up a certain number of fines, can we stop them charging? Actually physically using our chargers as a basis of, if you're not going to pay our fines, you can't use our infrastructure. If somebody's willing to sort of abuse the system, or is this going to be a £10 fine that just we never end up collecting because it costs too much to collect?
Alex or Neil, one you want to explain how the back office works with?
Yeah, I can start off being an EV user myself. What happens when you have an EV car, you register with Charge Place Scotland, and you actually set up a direct debit at this time. They know your address, your details, your car registration, and when you actually go to charge the car, you know, there's a little, like a credit card ticket. You put it in the charger and it registers it, so it knows exactly what time you come in and it knows exactly what time you leave. So any overstay charge is actually picked up through the back office system, and yes, you will receive a penalty charge. It's it probably, you know, within a week or so after that. So that's effectively how it works. Neil, do you want to add any more to that?
That probably covers it quite nicely, Alex. Yeah, the overstay fee is just literally added to your monthly invoice with Charge Place Scotland, and it's paid automatically. So I would assume that if somebody refused to pay it, they would no longer have access to the Charge Place Scotland network.
There's an ID for our parking meters.
Sorry, supplementary question, Mr. Councillor McEwen.
I just wonder if that's a good idea for our parking meters.
Any more questions on this paper? Jess?
I just had a question about how this relates to the mobility strategy, because obviously looking at electric vehicles needs to be seen in context of this, obviously the sustainable travel hierarchy of active travel. That's the first choice, being enabled, and then sustainable transport. And the car, even the EV, because it's not reducing our congestion or our space or improving our health with activity, has its place in that hierarchy, which is below active and sustainable transport in terms of climate and what we're trying to achieve in equalities and public health as well. So I just wondered how these things will relate to each other, and as they develop, will that be integral to the mobility strategy? And obviously the discussion of hubs comes into that as well, because obviously there can be collective reasons for, you know, taking your e-bike or walking to a hub where your car is charging, so you can then get on if you need the electric vehicle to make your other journeys along the beautifully electrified railways in Scotland by then, or the zero emission buses. So I just wondered how these things all connect up. That was my question.
Alex, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and you're absolutely right. I think there's two issues here. I think one at the end of the, in terms of our and sort of referring back to what sort of Davindi's shown in the pie charts in terms of the transport emissions. What we've done up to date, although it's provisional at this stage, has actually shown that the EV, or the growth in the EV market, is absolutely fundamental to achieving our overall emissions targets for transport. It's probably fair to say if the EV doesn't grow as planned, I think it's going to be very difficult in us achieving these targets. But the other thing to say in terms of the sustainable travel hierarchy, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, the EV is a car, just like any other car at the end of the day. The only difference is the the tailpipe at the back end. Everything else is very same. It doesn't solve where it helps our overall emission targets. It doesn't solve some of our congestion problems. So that's something that we have to bear in mind. And again, you're right. We would actively encourage through the mobility strategy that sustainable hierarchy where public transport, walking and cycling are much better options for these, particularly these shorter trips. But you're absolutely right.
Thank you. I've got Crawford Reid, Jack Welch and Grant Lane, and then I'm going to call an end to the questions on that one. Grant Lane, and that's what it says, Grant Lane, but yeah, Grant Stewart, sorry. Grant Lane posted the message for these that don't see it, so that's why I was confused a wee bit there. Yes, obviously. Jack, do you want to ask your question?
So I guess planning is going to play a massive part of rolling out these what I call EV charging hubs, for example, like the Tesla hubs, with significant capital investment required either by private organisations or indeed the council. I see the council probably acting more as a facilitator and using the planning process to do that. My particular question is, I've had approaches from a number of people, for example, in Scone, that there are no council public charging hubs available. With the Crosstay Road link now underway with construction, how are we as a council looking to provision, whether ourselves or in conjunction with other private operators? For example, Osprey is a company that's working, for example, with local authorities. For information, they are currently charging 66 pence a kilowatt hour for their charging rates. And a final question is, electricity and gas, for example, but electricity in this context is very volatile at the moment. Are we confident that the rate we choose to charge at from 1st of January takes account of that volatility and manages the risk?
Alex.
In terms of the energy costs, I think you're absolutely right. There is volatility in it. We've made it quite clear within the paper that the executive director will have the power to look at these tariffs almost constantly, I think, because that's where we're at the moment. So you're right. We are aware that the private sector is the charge rates are significantly more at the moment. I think what we've tried to do is introduce it as softly as possibly can, but keeping it consistent with our surrounding local authorities. There was no point in charging 70p a kilowatt hour in Invergowrie when Dundee is 23 pence, because we know what's going to happen. So we'll try to keep it low key at the moment. I think you're absolutely right. We will monitor it. I think it will go up. That's my view. In terms of the hubs and the additional facilities for like Scone, I think you're right. Again, I think that will depend a lot on the private sector role and whether it sees a business case. Again, it may come into that sort of cross fertilisation I was talking about, where we put the hubs in the areas where there is a high demand, but we can use some of the additional funding to actually place better facilities in each of these areas. But I think it's very, as David said, it's very much a moving feast at the moment. There's probably a lot of work to be done, and it is as you know, a very volatile market. It's a changing market with EV. Just on the TV last night, every advert was for an EV car. So the direction of travel, I think, is clear. But yeah, there's probably a lot of work to do in that. But I do take your point.
Thank you. My apologies, Councillor Crawford Reid, but can you should have been asked before, but can you ask your question, please?
Thanks, convener. And I suppose it's one of the problems for me doing my bit by staying at home, out of sight, out of mind. That's maybe no bad thing. Yesterday we had a presentation on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and I noticed that there is, as part of it, there's an EV infrastructure fund. Can I ask what stage we're at in trying to access funding from that UK fund?
Can I ask if David Littlejohn will answer that one?
Yes, happy to answer that question. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund is a little different from some of the other funds in that each local authority has been given an allocation of money. The money is released on the submission of an investment plan. So we're simply finalising at the moment our investment plan, which will be broadly divided into funding for business, funding for places, and funding for skills. And the anticipation that the place element of that would be effectively a challenge fund, inviting project ideas to come through from communities. So we know how much money we've got. It's not a huge amount over 3 years. It's off the top of my head, I think it's about 1.4 million or something like that. But we will. Sorry, no, it's a bit more. That's 4 million over 3 years. So we'll get that investment plan into the UK government within the next few weeks, and then the money will start to be available. And yes, it's pretty open. So a number of projects relating to the work of this committee could well be funded through the Shared Prosperity Fund.
Thank you.
Thank you. And last question to Councillor Grant Stewart.
Thank you, convener. I was wanting to ask a question about option 2 mentioned in 5.4, and it relates to the appendix where we see some local authorities making connection fees. I was wondering what the connection fees were about, please.
Neil, do you want to take that one?
Neil, yeah.
Yeah, the connection fee is an option that a number of local authorities have used. For example, in Dundee City Council, as soon as you plug into a charger, there's a connection fee of 38 pence, which covers, I guess, some of the administrative costs associated with the back office and such. Other authorities have used quite significant connection fees. For example, Fife have got a connection fee of £1.60. But there has been significant pushback from the Electric Vehicle Owners Association around that, because effectively what that does is it encourages people to stay on a charger for as long as possible to maximise the benefit of the connection charge. So you then end up with if you like, the charging behaviour being distorted by the connection fee. We felt that it was more transparent and also easier to understand for drivers to just have a minimum fee and then a cost per kilowatt associated with the energy they actually use. And again, that's similar to what the private sector are doing, and it's the approach that is suggested by the Electric Vehicle Association of Scotland.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a fair amount of questions, and if I'm just going to move the paper as recommended just now. Members will be aware that the Council currently offers free charging for electric vehicles. Since 2013, the Council have been introducing and increasing charging facilities across the Council area. While the free charging was to encourage the uptake of electric vehicles on the network and was supported by the Scottish Government, we are now at a stage where the market has evolved significantly, with usage to our charging facilities increasing year on year. This no doubt will continue to be the trend, with most major vehicle manufacturers having EV model options in their range. The Scottish Government targets in phasing out petrol and diesel vehicles from the network will no doubt increase significantly the growth in the number of EVs over the next few years, with the consequential increase in demand for charging facilities. Members should note, however, that the growth in electric vehicles will go a significant way to achieving our climate change targets set out in the Council's action plan, with transport being a major contributor to our overall emissions. While the availability of free charging has no doubt encouraged the growth in the number of EVs on the road, any further potential growth over the next period will place a significant burden on costs for the Council, with current estimated energy costs for operating free charging in the region of £230,000 per annum. With these costs predicted to increase significantly with rising energy costs and greater demand on charging facilities. We are now at a stage where electric vehicles can no longer be seen as niche in the market, and it is reasonable that users now pay the appropriate cost for their energy use. It is also important that the focus of our EV charging strategy now shifts to building a comprehensive and robust network throughout the Council area. I'm happy to accept the recommendations within the report and move the paper for approval. Is there any amendments? Councillor Barrett, would you like to second?
Thank you, Convener. As an EV owner who agrees it's high time that we started paying for our fuel, I'm very pleased to second this report.
Thank you. Is there now any amendments? Councillor Lane.
Thanks very much, Convener, and I welcome this report, and it's been a learning experience for myself, and it's been useful to have input from other members of the committee. I agree with the proposed charging. I think it's a sensible starting off point and especially after listening to Jess Pepper, I understand that it's not becoming such an elitist vehicle, and it's becoming broader use across society. And I think with the other pressures that people are having with cost of living, I think that it's a sensible tariff. But again, listening to people within here, my amendment is that I would like to propose that instead of limiting the stay to 3 hours, to make it 6 hours, because we don't want to, by curtailing the amount of charge on these lower rated vehicles, we don't want to make them that they can't be used, especially in rural areas. If you've got one and you can only charge it for 3 hours in Dunkeld or say whatever, or any other rural area, you may not be able to get to your work and back again if you can't. So that's my amendment. I was going to have a recess to discuss it with others before, but I'm looking for a seconder to propose at 5.1.3 for 22k chargers to change the limit from 3 hours a stay to 6 hours.
Somebody to say, you have a seconder, Councillor Lane?
I'm happy to second that specific amendment.
Thank you.
I think it would be helpful just quickly to have an officer's view about whether that is workable. Neil?
Yes, it would certainly be workable, and the that's something we can change. I think we would need to be mindful that that would reduce the availability of chargers where there is significant demand, but that is something we can monitor once the tariffs are in place as part of our ongoing monitoring of the usage and the costs associated with them.
Do we have a second amendment, Councillor Kugali?
Thank you. It should be coming up on the screen, hopefully, as long as everything's gone all right. Yeah. So I'd first like to say just thank you for meeting with Councillor Lingworth and myself a few months ago, where we talked about what we wanted this committee to be, and we kind of talked about how we wanted to be exciting, innovative, imaginative. So I'm not going to lie, there was a fair amount of disappointment when I realised this was the first paper, because it lacks quite a lot of that. And there is so much more potential in terms of the future of EV charging, especially in Perth and Kinross, that we could do that just seems to not have been explored. So whilst in principle we do understand the council needs to be charging in the meantime, it would be really, really helpful, I think, if officers could come back to the next committee with fully explored these options, and including actually I think possibly the longer stay for the lower powered charging points. So yeah, I move this amendment, and I wouldn't be averse to integrating into that second point that the parking fine cost comes after a longer period, potentially that's 6 hours, if that's sensible in terms of the range for lower powered electric vehicles.
Do you have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Okay. Can I just ask for a recess here just to discuss both the amendments? Thank you.
Is this something to do with my machine?
Amendments, and I don't know if Councillor Grant Lane would like to amend his amendment if possible.
Yeah, after discussion, I'm happy to move to 4 hours, because if we do have people coming into work, that would give them time to put their vehicle on charge and then take off charge at their lunch break, and somebody else could use the charger. So I think that a compromise of 4 hours and it's monitored, and it'll come back to a future committee as to how that's working. So I'm happy to settle on a 4 hour for the 22 kilowatt chargers.
Thank you, Councillor McEwen.
Yes, I'm happy to second that. I think this initially we're trying to make this the best we can to start with, and of course it will change with evidence and reflection. And I can maybe see a yearly setting of the EV charger thing being a big paper for your committee.
Or for budgets. Councillor Kugali.
Yes, I'm happy to integrate that into point 2 of our amendment.
Yep, I'm happy with that.
That's to change not to come before the next committee. So we want us to look at the issues in due course, but as soon as we possibly can. Yes.
Yes. So yeah, change the wording of that first sentence to at future committee rather than the next committee.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Based on the 2 amendments that have been brought forward, I'm happy to incorporate both of them into the motion. Councillor Barrett.
And I'm happy to second that incorporation. Thank you all.
Do we have any comments? Any comments on the paper? Councillor Lane.
I'll be very brief. I think this committee is certainly a learning curve for myself, and I think that by accepting amendments, and we can maybe make the papers more informed. So yeah, I'm delighted that we're moving forward. We have to do this. We have to start charging. Looking at council finances, we cannot afford to subsidise people to the tune of $250,000 and rising every year. So yeah, happy with the paper and glad that we can all agree it.
Thank you, Councillor Kugali.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's good to see that we've got the first paper of the committee done, and hopefully moving forward we can keep those tenets of, as being exciting, imaginative, ingenuitive, all at the core of everything we're doing, because that is really, really key if we're going to make a long-term success of this.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Convener. I'm pleased to see that we're going to be looking at the pricing structure for electric vehicle charging. I think it needs to be a price that reflects the cost not only of the energy, but of the investment required, continuing investment in the infrastructure. I also think we need to have a price that encourages home charging overnight, because if you charge electric vehicles overnight at home, then you're actually using electricity that's in low demand and much cheaper. So anything we can do to encourage EV owners to do that is a good thing.
Thank you. Councillor McKeown.
Thank you. I'm pleased to see that you've accepted both amendments. I think that none of us know the future, and none of us know the exact answers to these new challenges that we face going forward. And I think it's only the right thing to do to always explore and always keep our options open for all the solutions that are out there to take this forward.
Thank you. Any other comments? Right, that's the first paper finished. Thank you very much, everybody. Councillor Liz Barrett's going to take the second paper.
Thank you, Convener. Could I please ask Davindy Grant, the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Team Leader, to introduce this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The Nature Restoration Fund is an annual fund for biodiversity enhancement that is now awarded to the Council by Nature Scott. This report provides an overview of how the Council and our communities successfully delivered the first phase of the £166,000 fund of this funding last year, and how we are planning to build on that work in year 2. With this funding, last year Community Green Space planted over 1,000 trees, restored the South Inch suds ponds, and provided pollinator-friendly planting in council green spaces. But by also setting aside fundings for projects in the communities, further significant success was achieved. This included supporting the priorities of the Tayside Biodiversity Action Plan and those communities themselves. This allowed Glengarry and Rattray to achieve the status of Scotland's first biodiversity town. Schools completed outdoor nature spaces, and the Kinross Civic Trust established an award-winning rain garden. The report recommends the committee approves a continued split in funding between community green space and projects led by community partners. For this year, Community Green Space have identified an excellent portfolio of projects to meet the criteria of the fund. But by also providing funding for projects led by organizations in the community, we can tap in and encourage enthusiasm for nature and support of our commitment to communities and embodying the Perth and Kinross offer. The report also summarizes the process for approving and reporting back on projects, and this is further detailed in Appendix 3. The report also recommends that authority to approve projects is delegated to the Executive Director of Communities. Applications would then be approved once a recommendation is provided by a working group of competent officers. Thank you, and we're happy to take any questions.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't seeing it in the.
In 5.4, points out that the funding for 22-23 is split 60-40 between community green space and community project. I was wondering how that number got arrived on, or whether community green space just needed 60% of the funding.
The number was reached, I mean, community green space identified that they could spend the full range of the funding. So it was looking back at what the purpose of the funding was. Last year, sorry, I'm not close enough to the microphone. Last year, we saw the real value of doing community projects. So it was something we'd wanted to support. And we felt it was a real way to sort of amplify the biodiversity work sort of going on in our communities. But looking at what the initial focus of the fund was, last year the funding was focused on sort of biodiversity work focused on council land. This year there's still a focus on council land, but they've sort of expanded up to the communities. But given that focus on council land, which is why we sort of divided the 60-40, sort of thinking it as a sort of a relatively fair split.
Okay.
I think as well, Councillor Kigali, there was an issue about the timing of the funding and, you know, sort of the opportunities for our community groups to be able to bid in once we'd been notified of the timing of that, and to be able to deliver the projects, given that they're capital expenditure within this financial year.
Thank you both. Councillor Dave Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question also relates to the 60-40 split. My feeling is that we should really be trying to encourage community groups who can also leverage money out of other sources that the council can't. And I wonder why we need to put a cap on the 60-40 and not just say, well, we invite all applications across the board, both the council and the community, and then put it through this committee of the, you know, including members of the Climate Change Board, to actually work out which are the best potential or the best results or the most productive. And I just wondered, do we need to have a 60-40 cap?
Thank you, Deputy Convener. The Councillor Cuthbert, you know, sort of that is a possibility, you know, sort of, but again, I'd refer back to, you know, sort of my answer to Councillor Kigali's question that, you know, sort of the timing of the actual award of funding, you know, sort of makes that difficult to ensure that we would spend the totality of it. More than happy, you know, sort of in future years that we do, you know, sort of go with that process, because I think that probably we are hoping that as we move forward with the funding, then we will get much earlier notification. But again, it's about the ability to spend that funding within, you know, sort of the timescales that we've got been given, and our communities to be able them to bring forward their proposals.
Yep, supplementary, yep.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. My experience is that community groups can move incredibly quickly, and if there's money available, they sort of come out of the woodwork. And I would hate to think that we've got this 60-40 split, and then there's a whole lot of community groups come forward and say, we're really keen to do something, we've got this idea, and we'll implement it within a month, which they can do because they've got the buy-in of the community or whatever. So it just seems sad, to me anyway, that we cap it at 40% of this is the maximum that can be awarded to community groups. So I'm wondering if we can build some flexibility in, so that if there is really good ideas coming from the community, they may take over from some of the council ideas.
I'm looking at officers within that, you know, sort of that again, you know, sort of more than happy to look at that, you know, sort of in terms of the overall approach. But the work that Community Green Space has been doing, and I'm looking to the officers to say yes or no, is already we are already working with a number of community groups in terms of the projects that are within that list, and Davindy is saying yes, so that there are already community groups involved in that 60% spend as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ling.
etc. on council property was a priority. So I'm glad to hear that we'll get to try and get rid of some of the Himalayan balsam that's all over Perth and Kinross, I'm afraid. My understanding, the question was that in the conclusion, does it not say that in the next round of funding that we can take Councillor Cuthbert's views on board and it can be changed? So I'm quite happy that in the conclusion that says moving forward in 23-24, if we have an earlier one, it could be 100% allocated or whatever. So that gives me some comfort. Is my understanding correct? You only have to say one word, Barbara, and I hope it's.
Nope, there we go. Yes.
Thank you. Are there any more questions on the report? No. Okay, well, in that case, I'm pleased to move the report. As members will be aware, that Perth and Kinross Council is a signatory to the Edinburgh Declaration, which recognises the need for transformative action on biodiversity, and it notes the vital role that local communities and wider society play in taking action. The Nature Restoration Fund is a great opportunity to build on our ongoing efforts. Last year, Community Green Spaces successfully implemented large-scale projects providing an increase in biodiversity resource in our green spaces, and we've also seen how effective empowering communities to deliver their own projects can be, from the Biodiversity Town project in Blairgowrie and Rattray to the award-winning Wildlife Rain Garden at Kinross Park and Ride. Providing funding to communities embodies the Perth and Kinross offer and all the benefits that brings, and I welcome the proposals by Councillor Cuthbert that we aim to widen this next year. This proposal puts forward to provide funding for community green space priority projects and also empowers the organisations in the community to bring forward their own priorities for biodiversity. This delivers benefits both for nature and for the people who value and experience it. The report also recommends delegation of authority to approve projects following a written process and the recommendations of a range of experienced officers, which will provide both applicants with certainty in an efficient way. I'm happy to accept the recommendations in the report and I move the paper for approval, and I'd please like to ask Councillor Waters to second the report.
Thank you. I think this is an excellent fund. I think what's achieved in the first year is exceptional. In Kinross, Councillor Cuthbert and myself got shown around the rain gardens and how you can build a suds pond into a car park area and a park and ride. That also has a huge biodiversity benefit within, and it exemplifies to me what this fund is about. It's a 5-year fund, so the funding will go on, and it will support more similar type projects. So I have no hesitation in seconding this paper as recommended.
Thank you, Convener. Comments? I see a comment from Councillor McEwen.
Thank you very much, Convener. Yeah, I very much welcome this paper, and obviously being a councillor by Blairgowrie, Rattray and the Glens, I first-hand see the local activity from our local groups who are so uber enthusiastic, and I think Councillor Cuthbert is right that there are many local groups around Perth and Kinross that will look to use this money and work with the council. There are some things local groups can't do with equipment and skills and labour, etc., that the council can work with local groups to do. I look forward to that going forward. The only challenge that I see going forward is actually being able to ensure that all our community are informed and educated on these issues. Living in a rural ward, some people can be quite baffled at why we need to increase biodiversity when everything that's around you is growing and green, and it's not like living in Perth where everything around you is houses. But there's still the challenge to know that a farmer's monoculture is not the same as a biodiverse area where insects and other invertebrates and mammals can live, and the benefits that it has to our economy, to climate. I'm not sure yet that the full breadth of the public is truly aware. So I think one of our challenges will be the education and understanding, and I think starting that in schools through our schools' involvement in these activities will be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McEwen. I completely agree with your comments, and I look forward to us as a committee and the Climate Commission being able to raise the profile of biodiversity and understanding of it across Perth and Kinross. Thank you. Councillor Lang?
Thanks very much, Vice Convener. Yes, this is very close to my heart, and I've taken part in a few of these things, and I learned the word pollinators, which I've managed to use at council quite often since I've learned it was the new word for me. So I managed to acquire 1,000 snowdrop bulbs and put them in through this scheme. I also learnt the word hoggaloo, I think it is, as I managed to get a hibernating box to be put out in one of the graveyards in my ward, and also 4 bat roost boxes, which I managed to get up in suitable trees without well, not going to health and safety. So yeah, I can see we can all get involved in this, and the involvement with schools is very important. So I really welcome this paper, and I welcome the work that we can all do to help improve biodiversity across Perth and Kinross. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lang. Some question about how you acquired some of the boxes, but hey. The bulbs. Oh, the bulbs, sorry. Thank you very much. Useful information. I'll be on to that for the next lot. Thank you. Martin Mathers, you have a comment.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, 2 points. First, in response to the thing about country versus city, I'd like to remind everyone that within 100 metres of where we're sitting, if you're lucky in the summer, you can see breeding kingfisher, you can see beaver, and you can see osprey hunting. Not many cities can claim that. And the other thing I would like to say is, yes, I think it's absolutely vital that we publicise as much as we can about this, and the Commission should be doing its bit on that. I'm very aware that there was some sort of adverse reaction to a No Mow initiative this year. One of those No Mows is right round behind where I live, and it has become a haven for bats in the evening because all the flowering plants that have been allowed to go to flower and then to seed have brought in moths and other insects, and the bats have followed the food supply. We should be doing a lot more to point out the benefits in advance of doing initiatives like that.
Thank you very much, Martin. So if there are no other, oh, sorry, Jess, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I just wanted to add to that engagement about an understanding of biodiversity and the connections between the ecological emergency and the climate emergency. If you hear presentations from the Perth and Kinross Countryside Trust, they'll inform us that actually less than 2% of our land area is managed for nature, and the national ambition is 30% by 2030, and that's the global pledge as well. And so thinking what we can be doing here, there's a huge challenge in front of us, and especially when we're mindful that not every city may have the same opportunities that we do in this part of Scotland as well. So the scale of the challenge is huge, and we're obviously treasure the biodiversity in this area, but just that connection on those priorities is something which we can all be keen on, and the community leadership on this is excellent to see, and to see it being supported is great too.
Thanks very much, Jess. Are there any other comments? No. Thank you. Can we agree the recommendations in the report? Thank you very much.
Just thank you everybody for attending. Thank you to the 4 members of the Climate Change Commission for coming along. Emily, I hope you've enjoyed and it's been helpful, and I wish everybody a good afternoon. Thank you. That's the meeting closed.